Since the dawn of modern medicine, mental asylums or madhouses have earned a dark and troubling reputation. Often started with good intentions, these institutions soon descended into places of abhorrent conditions, medical misconduct, human experimentation, and even torture of society's most vulnerable citizens. But among the many psychiatric institutions around the world, the following asylums rank above them all for their inhumane treatment and lasting legacies of fear. Enter, if you will, history's most notorious asylums where medicine and healing went hand in hand with brutality and abandonment. 5. Danvers State Hospital. Opening its doors in 1878 to the mentally ill, Danvers State Hospital is probably best known today for being the set for the psychological horror film Session 9, in which a man on an asbestos cleanup crew finds himself slowly going insane while working in an abandoned mental facility. It is also believed this facility was the inspiration for Lovecraft's Arkham Sanatorium and, by extension, the Arkham Asylum in the DC universe. Its location was, in itself, precarious, as it was built upon the spot where Salem witch trials Judge John Hathorne once lived, adding to its cursed reputation. When Danvers opened, the facility was designed for 450 patients, and the medical staff implemented policies against physical restraints and detailed a plan to cure patients rather than simply house them away from society. These noble intentions were abandoned by the beginning of the 20th century when the overcrowded hospital housed almost 2,000 patients. The overwhelmed staff struggled to maintain control, resulting in the implementation of straitjackets, shock therapy, and lobotomies. The hospital closed its doors in 1992, and it remained an abandoned urban ruin for over 10 years until it was purchased in 2005 by a developer planning to repurpose it as apartments. Despite the local historical society's objections, the majority of the buildings were demolished to construct apartments, and the original buildings were gutted, leaving only the facade intact. '4. Willowbrook State School. This Staten Island institution for mentally ill children opened its doors in 1947. From the very beginning, the Willowbrook suffered from outbreaks of hepatitis A. Medical professionals used the institution as a place to study the effects of the disease and the treatment of drugs. By the 1970s, public outrage at using sick children as medical guinea pigs forced such experiments to cease. Despite the accusations of malpractice, the research did lead to minor breakthroughs in the study of the disease. By this time, the facility had developed a reputation as a warehouse for the mentally disabled due to its overcrowding and deplorable conditions. Several reporters wrote pieces on the poor conditions of the facility as well as the neglect and abuse suffered by the patients. In 1972, a class action lawsuit was filed against the state of New York on behalf of the patients. This case was partially responsible for the federal law protecting institutionalized individuals in 1980. The school was closed in 1987 with parts of it repurposed for Staten Island College. 3. Trenton State Hospital. Trenton State Hospital was founded in 1848 by Dorothy Lindy Dix, a mental health advocate of the time. Dr. Henry Cotton assumed directorship of the facility in 1907 with an approach that was opposed to patient restraints and worked to implement occupational therapy programs. However, his seemingly progressive tactics weren't as clean and kind as the world might believe. Cotton believed that physical infections were the root of mental instability and, as such, would often utilize physical means to try and cut out the infections. He and his staff routinely removed organs and teeth, in an attempt to cut off mental illness at its perceived root. While he claimed a 90% success rate in healing his patients, death tolls were high. His medical practices continued after he departed the facility and died in 1933. However, Cotton's legacy and brutal practices lasted until 1960. Today, the immense building lies abandoned, falling into ruin. Metropolitan State Hospital. When it opened in 1927, this institution was the largest and most advanced hospital of its kind in Massachusetts. The location of the hospital was chosen based on the need for mental health treatments in the greater Boston area. In fact, it even boasted a building entirely devoted to providing care for mentally ill minors. However, not everything about the progressive hospital was as it appeared, and it soon earned a grim nickname, the Hospital of Seven Teeth. In 1978, a patient named Marie Davy was out for a walk on the grounds from which she never returned. It was not until 1980 that the truth of what happened to her was finally uncovered. Melvin Wilson, a fellow patient, revealed 3 separate graves to law enforcement where he buried parts of Davy's body. To top it off, he kept 7 of her teeth as souvenirs of his deed. The hospital remained open for a short time before closing in 1992 due to budget cuts. Today, parts of the campus have been converted into apartment housing while others remain open to the public as a historic site with walking trails. 1. Topeka State Hospital. The Topeka State Hospital, formerly known as the Topeka State Asylum, opened its doors in 1872 for treatment of the mentally ill. By the early 20th century, rumors of rape and mistreatment in the hospital had already begun. Over the course of decades, the hospital became the subject of investigation for unethically chaining patients and neglect. In 1951, the hospital received damaging criticism when it was revealed that John Crabb, a 59-year-old patient, was mentally sane and wrongfully incarcerated in the institution. After this period, the hospital rapidly underwent reforms to improve treatment and ensure correct diagnosis. In 1987, a patient named Kenneth Waddell was transferred to the high-risk ward of the facility before the ward was closed and he was moved into the general population. On the night of February 23, 1992, he attacked and murdered music and activity therapist Stephanie Ulrich, after he and a group of other patients were taken off-site to see a movie. While law enforcement did not find the hospital responsible, the incident was a final and damning blow to the reputation of the institution. In 1997, the hospital closed its doors and, as of June 2010, many of the old buildings have been demolished.